Hello and welcome to Professor Pincushion. In this tutorial, I'm going to be talking about the satin stitch. I'm going to be showing you how to do a hand satin stitch for embroidery embellishment and also how to do a machine satin stitch. Let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start with the hand satin stitch first. So this stitch is a filler stitch. It's an embroidery stitch that you use to fill in an area using embroidery floss. This is going to be my example fabric that I'm going to use. Now, if you're using some pre-printed design, that is going to be your guideline, or if you do something on your own, I would definitely recommend using a fabric marker or fabric pencil, something that can erase after you finish, and go ahead and draw your design so you can use something as a guideline and make it a lot easier and neater for you. When you're doing embroidery, I highly recommend that you use a hoop. It just makes it a lot easier to hold and to sew, and it holds your fabric tight, so it's really nice to use. It doesn't even have to be a very big one. I'm using kind of a smallish one here, but you can always move it around as you're sewing your design. So let's go ahead and put this on. So the inside part goes underneath the design, and I try to center it as best I can. And then I undo the screw right here as much as I can so I can just fit it over the top, and then I can always tighten it. And then once you have it pretty tight, you can go ahead and pull your fabric a little bit more so you make sure it's really tight. Now let's talk about the thread. So I'm using embroidery floss. The length I would say is about 14 inches. You don't want to cut a huge long piece because then it's just going to get all tangled up. So you definitely want something to manage, and it's better to be a little bit on the shorter side than to worry about how many times you're going to have to tie a knot. I'm also using an embroidery needle. This makes it very helpful as well. Now when you cut your floss, you'll notice that the single floss is made up of a bunch of little strands. So there should be 6 strands, and for my example I'm going to go ahead and use 3 of those strands. So there's 3 strands on here, and it really just depends on how thick you want each stitch to be. So if you want it more on the thinner side, you can use 2 strands, or if you want it thicker, you can use 4. It's really up to you to experiment on that. So it's on my needle, and then on the very end here I just tie a knot. You can see that I already started on my design. So what my stitches are essentially doing is they're filling in the space in between my lines. That's why it's a filler stitch. So what I'm going to do is start on the back, and I'm going to bring up my needle, and I'm starting on the back so my knot's going to be hidden. So I'm actually going to start right here on this inside part of my flower, and I'm starting just outside my blue line. You can see that's right on the edge. Pull it through, and the trick is when you're pulling your stitches through, don't pull it too tight or it'll start puckering your fabric. So you want it to have a nice tension but not too tight. Alright, let's move this out of the way so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to start on the opposite side on the edge of my blue line, and I'm going to come up on this side again on the outside of the blue line. And I'm coming up right next to where my stitch came out. And then I'm going to pull it through. And again, not too tight. You just want it to be snug. Then I'm going to again start on the opposite side. So I'm always starting on the same side and then coming up on the same side. So I start here on the bottom, and I'm getting pretty close to my first stitch here, because you want to stay close to your stitches so then it looks filled in and you don't have all these gaps. And then I'm going to come up right on the outside of my blue line next to where my thread is coming out. And then you're pulling it. So again, starting on the same side, going right next to my stitch, my previous stitch, and then coming out right on the outside of that blue line on the same side, next to where the thread's coming out. So I just keep doing this till this whole thing is filled in, and if you need to change your thread, then tie a knot in the back and get some more thread. So I start here and then bring my needle out on this side, and I always do the same thing, and that'll make your stitches look really uniform. here's my completed project with all the satin stitch done. Next, we're going to talk about what does a satin stitch mean for machine sewing. So you may be wondering, if you look at this, it's really cool, but can I do something similar on my sewing machine? The answer is yes and no. You can do it if you have an embroidery machine, but if you have just a regular sewing machine, you can still do a satin stitch, but it's going to look more like this. And what it is a zigzag stitch, but the stitches are really close together, so what it does is it forms just a straight line with all these stitches stacked. What it's used for is for doing outlines, such as on your appliques. So it's a really nice stitch to use, but you're not going to quite get something of this effect. So I'm going to show you how to do this next on your machine. If your machine can do a zigzag stitch, you should be able to pull off a satin stitch as well. So we're going to just ignore all these numbers except for these two numbers here. I've already selected the zigzag stitch for my machine. This is the stitch width number and this is the stitch length. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lower the stitch length because I want my stitches to be very close together. So it's still zigzagging back and forth, but it's doing it really close together. So I'm lowering as low as I can go without hitting 0. Now the width of it is going to depend on how thick you want your row to be. So you can see this one here is actually a 4.5, and then you can see it's thicker down here. So I did the widest stitch I can do on my machine, which is a 6. So depending on what you want to do, you can adjust it, and I definitely recommend playing with your machine until you get something that you're comfortable with. I've already ironed my applique onto my fabric, and now I'm going to use my satin stitch to outline that applique. Now I want to make sure that the edge of my applique falls right in the middle of the width of my stitches. So my stitches aren't coming to the edge, in fact they're going to be overlapping and going on both sides. So I'm just going to take my time so that I make sure to carefully outline it and the whole thing is covered and looks nice and neat. Here's an example of my completed satin stitch around my heart applique. So you can see the satin stitch is a little bit different than the hand satin stitch we did before, but both of them are used for decoration and embellishment. New tutorials are released weekly, so please subscribe to be notified of the next release. Make sure to check out our other videos and visit ProfessorPincushion.com to view our complete library with well over 200 sewing video tutorials, including our exclusive premium content. Our premium membership is only $5 a month for unlimited access and only available at ProfessorPincushion.com. Also, don't forget to download our mobile app for videos on the go. Thanks for watching.